Welcome to Demming Chronicles, where we chat with persons whose ideas and opinions can make a difference to the future of our country. They are citizens who are taking a chance with several concepts. Demming Chronicles. Today's program, we have three wonderful guests. We have Vaalmiki Arjoon. Welcome, Vaalmiki.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Denise.
Thanks. And we also have Jules, what we call him, Caesar's Army Commander-in-Chief. Welcome, Jules.
Thank you for having me, Denise.
And we have Katherine Agong, a transportation specialist. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you, Denise, for having me on your show. Thank you.
Demming Chronicles, we'll be back with you shortly with these exciting guests. Welcome back to Demming Chronicles, and we welcome Vaalmiki Arjoon. Vaalmiki, for ever so long, we've always heard about diversification. And in my opinion, Trinidad and Tobago has not really diversified the economy. But I am excited because you've recently written a research paper on economic complexity. Remember, my guests are not students, they're not economists, my guests are normal people. Describe for us, what do you mean by economic complexity?
Well, the gist of it is really, it takes economic diversification 10 steps ahead. I mean, we've always heard we need to establish a well-diversified production structure in order to break this dependency on hydrocarbons, because while the oil and gas would have given us substantial revenues in the past, it has also cost us greatly this dependency time and time again when the price of oil and gas were to tumble on the international markets. Now, diversification certainly does have its benefits. The most basic one is that it renders us with greater self-sufficiency, but it does not necessarily render an economy with significant export competitiveness, especially if you do diversify into various sectors, but these sectors are producing commodities that are available in a host of other countries out there. But on the other hand, if you were to diversify into different sectors that would manufacture a diverse range of items that always meant that are not easily available elsewhere or are only produced by a small handful of other economies, then you would find that you're always going to maintain a very good degree of export competitiveness, both in normal economic times and in times of a severe negative economic shock, similar to what we're going through since last year. This is where economic complexity comes in. Now, what is complexity? Countries with a high level of economic complexity, they tend to have not just several diverse industries, but these industries tend to place greater emphasis on using technical knowledge, on using innovation and superior technologies in order to produce a healthy mix of commodities that are both used for local consumption and for export. But what is very distinctive about these knowledge-based commodities is that they have what you call low ubiquity, meaning they can only be produced by a few countries. Okay, they are only produced by probably one country or by just a handful of countries. Now, by the same token, however, countries with a low level of economic complexity, they tend to have not just a less diversified production structure, but the items that they produce are also very much available from many other countries in the international market, because it does not require significant technical expertise. It doesn't require advanced scientific knowledge for production. Now, in this line of thinking, a more complex production structure, economic complexity, it's not just associated with more diversification, but it takes it 10 steps ahead. You diversify into various industries that utilize a greater knowledge base, a more skilled labor force, and you manufacture products that are certainly not easily available elsewhere on the international market.
Vaalmiki, what I am hearing is you're talking about niche production or niche marketing. Can you tell us a little more, give us some examples of what is niche, what is that, and who's doing it?
Well, for example, and I want to bring it tie it into the pandemic as well. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of having a complex production structure. Now it is tied to niche marketing, but I think it's more niche marketing with a more more specialized and a more technical production base as well, a more scientifically innovative production base as well. Now, we've seen from the pandemic, it's highlighted the importance of having this type of production structure. So, for example, many countries, they would have faced delays in receiving important medication from their usual suppliers due to the pressure of higher global demand, due to the pressure caused by supply chain issues. Now, this not only led to a shortage of medication in certain countries, but it also increased its prices. So the consequences of this would emphasize the importance of our countries to the need to bolster their investments in research and the production of pharmaceuticals. And that is just one way in which countries could improve their complexity. So imagine if we here in Trinidad and Tobago had a thriving pharmaceutical sector. Who knows, maybe we could have been manufacturing vaccines here, partnering with companies like Pfizer, etc., and we wouldn't be in this bind to access adequate vaccines. And as you can appreciate, mass vaccination is really the key to getting us out of this pandemic. But in addition to this, businesses all over the world, including our own manufacturers, our very own food distributors, etc., they can't get easy access right now. And in fact, since last year, since 2020, they can't get easy access to the necessary inputs necessary for the production process, necessary machinery, etc., in order to facilitate their operations. And this is because right now, the economic recovery in many economies, and the pent-up demand, what we call revenge demand, is actually causing their private sector to place significant orders for goods for resale and raw materials, etc. So because of these large orders, suppliers are not able to meet all the global demand, and therefore you have a shortage. And that shortage is causing an increase in the prices of certain items like medication, items like certain food items as well, and the list goes on and on. If, however, we were economically complex, we wouldn't be faced with this issue as we would be manufacturing much of these items right here. And in the economic complexity rankings, in the latest rankings, Japan and Singapore are actually leading the way in economic complexity. More so Japan, especially because they are a very technologicalized society.
Vaalmiki, two things. You talked about revenge demand. I find that a fascinating concept. Can you just explain that a little for us? So explain revenge demand. And the other thing that you talked about earlier is a knowledge-based sector, a knowledge-based skills workforce. Talk to me a little bit about those two concepts.
Certainly. Well, first of all, we in TNT, to some degree, and I use that very cautiously, we do have a knowledge-based population, and that would have been because of certain successes of the initial dollar for dollar and then the GATE program. The real gap in that overall picture is that there were no industries for them to fall into, or not enough industries for them to fall into after they would have graduated from the university. Now, in order for us to really get into this idea of economic complexity, one of the key features of it that we have to facilitate here in Trinidad and Tobago is bolstering our foreign direct investment. Because of we're in a pandemic, I want to tie it back to pharmaceuticals, right, with a simple example. If we were to in the future attract a large manufacturing firm, perhaps out of one of the countries that is leading in pharmaceuticals, like for example in India, if we were to attract a pharmaceutical player, like for example Sun Pharma, out of the Indian economy, to set up a base of operations here in Trinidad and Tobago, what they can do first of all, one of the first things they could do rather is start to educate our population about pharmaceutical manufacturing. And then perhaps the University of the West Indies can start their very own program. They have a program of BSc in pharmacy, but they can also have introduce a BSc program in pharmaceutical manufacturing at the same time. The Faculty of Social Sciences could also have a specialized program in management in the pharmaceutical industry. All of that being introduced and taught to us initially by these foreign investors. Now, since they would have set up operations here, they would then recruit these graduates thereafter, continue the training. So after between 5 and 10 years, we would therefore be very equipped to carry on this sector on our own. And in that particular space of time, in that particular period, we would be producing a pharmaceutical line of items, not just for local consumption, but also for export consumption as well. Now, you asked also about revenge demand. And revenge demand is very simple. It's really the pent-up demand. So last year, much of the private sector would have been closed. Much of the global economy were in a lockdown. So many persons would not have been going out to work. And those who would have been saving their monies, remember, there is a certain level of consumption that they would have had to sacrifice. So now, not just individuals as well, not just consumers, but you're also looking at businessmen, as in you're also looking at investors globally as well. Because they've held back for so long, now it's like, if globally, because many other countries have reopened their economies, they're able to their private sector is able to operate, not necessarily at full capacity, but they are operating. Many of these individuals are very eager to spend. So there's a very high demand now coming out of certain countries, particularly the United States and also even in China, given the fact that activities would have been suppressed last year. Now they have some money saved. They want to unleash that in various new business ventures and in various consumption patterns, new consumption patterns as well. So that is the basic gist of this revenge demand.
And that sounds very, very exciting. It sounds as if there's a tremendous future in wherever we could identify this kind of pent-up demand. And Vaalmiki, the final question that I just wanted to raise with you is, how could Trinidad and Tobago organize its ecosystem so that we become more complex and this concept of economic complexity becomes the norm?
Well, in my research paper, I would have come across and also proposed several various ways in which we could do this. But in the interest of time, I'll just give a few. The first thing is greater and more equitable access to financing. Now, my study focused not just on Trinidad and Tobago, but in 18 Latin American and Caribbean countries. What I found is that throughout these economies, there's a very inequitable access to finance and foreign exchange from the commercial banks, where SMEs, but in particular in the region, they find it a lot more difficult to acquire credit from financial institutions because they are regarded as riskier with a higher chance of default. And that, of course, limits their ability and limits the amount of funds they have available to them to invest in technological advancement, to invest in acquiring greater technical knowledge in order to expand and diversify their product mix. But then you have the large companies who get better access to this money, but they are far fewer in number, these number of companies. They tend, even though they receive a greater part of these credit financing, what I found is that most of these funds are spent on importing final goods for resale in the country in which they're operating. And if they are manufacturing in order for export purposes, they tend to stick to what they know. They tend to stick to what they traditionally produce. So they import the inputs, they import the machinery, manufacture and sell. But and they do this without a willingness to take on additional risk and venture into a different and a more innovative, a more sophisticated product line for export purposes. So this type of culture is one avenue that ought to be changed, especially when acquiring funds from the commercial banks. You need an equitable distribution of funds and foreign exchange from the commercial banks. And when these monies are acquired, businesses need to be willing to be able to take that risk and venture into a different and innovative product line, something that is different to what they traditionally would have been doing in the past. What I also found is that countries that exert better control of corruption, they have a greater chance of becoming more economically complex because more of the country's expenditure is directed towards developing new productive sectors in the economy to build their export capacity, rather than just allocating it to specific sectors or specific projects where government officials could extort a bribe. And there are other instances, of course, of dealing under the umbrella of corruption, where, for example, customs officials, when they delay access to imported raw materials and machinery with greater control of corruption, this tends to be mitigated because there's less chances of bribes and special favors being paid to these officials, which could otherwise impede the overall production process. Now, there's also another avenue along the corruption lines, where in some Latin American countries, you would find that bankers, there's less opportunity, there's greater control of corruption, there's less opportunity for bankers to grant favors in terms of providing special financing to certain members of the private sector. It actually creates a more efficient allocation of loans across the private sector so that credit could be redirected towards the most productive firms rather than those firms that are willing to pass something under the table to a senior banker. And of course, when the most productive firms get these monies, they would be in a better position to invest it in technological innovation and produce diverse and sophisticated items for exports. Of course, there's also the need for greater economic freedom being closely tied to the ease of doing business, because economic complexity will generally rise when the private sector experiences things like less bureaucracy when trying to accomplish certain essential procedures with various public service entities, like, for example, registering a new business, getting access to permits and licenses very quickly, submitting new documents and payments for international trade, getting electricity, and the list goes on and on. Not just in TNT, but in the entire region, these procedures are very, very lengthy, with high costs creating obstacles, and these high costs, together with these delays, are obviously going to create obstacles in the overall supply chain. If these procedures are made simpler and less costly, then it would enable for a faster and a more diverse commercial and industrial economy in not just in TNT, but in the entire Latin American region, which in turn is going to help to improve your economic complexity.
Vaalmiki, one final question. If you had to lead an initiative, where would you begin?
If I had to lead an initiative, I would first, because I have a penchant for finance, given that my background is financial economics, I would try to assist the state and the private sector into getting additional financial resources for the economy, for the country. So I would first of all start with the private sector, especially these small companies, try to educate and to assist these small companies to help them to be able to raise more finances at this point in time for their economy, for their companies. But in addition to this, on a side note, the small business sector, they need to be educated in becoming more innovative with their business model. Something as what we're seeing right now in other countries, they're embracing the technology, changing their business model. Something as simple as moving from a physical location to now utilizing the technology so that your company is now operating in a single digital space. So I would start off with helping them to achieve more financing and transitioning from the model of a physical location to now operating within a single digital space. If you're in a single digital space, first advantage, apart from having a lower cost of operations, is that you have access to a much bigger and diverse market for your company. So that is where I would initially start.
And on that note, beginning with supporting businesses and taking advantage of the digital space, using COVID as a game changer to push Trinidad into economic complexity in a digital world. Thank you very much, Vaalmiki Arjoon. Demming Chronicles, we'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back, Demming Chronicles. And on today's program, we have the Commander-in-Chief. What do you call yourself, Jules?
The Commander-in-Chief of Caesar's Army.
What a fun name, and what it has been successful. Tell me, Jules, when you think of living in Trinidad, what brings you joy?
I could tell you that the pandemic has taught me new forms of joy. So, for example, let's just say understanding what Trinidad and Tobago has to offer as a destination. That was very apparent for me. So my wife is very much involved in tours and travel. And even with the pandemic shift, she shifted creating these experiences within Trinidad and Tobago itself. So for me, I was able to tag along on these adventures and understand new places such as Nolly's Tunnel and the Carnival Bird Sanctuary, etc. Things that are here in front of us. So ideally, that brought me a lot of joy that I got to understand Trinidad and Tobago a lot better. And I think outside of that, I spend a lot of time, I'm a storyteller, so I spend a lot of time with movies and documentaries and books, anything that will inspire the brain to tell new stories, whether it comes to my events or even, let's say, theater. I get inspiration from these forms of, what should I say, media or books, etc.
That is so good to hear that you've got to know your country even more because of COVID. That's taking it internally and making a tremendous difference. But tell me something. What is required in this country for creatives like you to thrive?
For creatives to thrive, I will tell you the first thing is that there needs to have more of a focus or understanding of how the creative industry is evolving. That's the first thing. I don't think there's a focus on it. I don't think there's an understanding of it. And as you would know, the creative industry is a number of segments. It could be events, it could be music, it could be art, etc., etc. I've even delved into theater. So in a sense, the creative industry is a wide expanse. But I think that there is a need to understand the creative industry, to understand the different segments, the different aspects of it. And there needs to have a focus, not just for supporting it, but also educating. Because from where I stand, being an entrepreneur, I would have understood that the hardest part for me was being on my own. As an entrepreneur, I had to go and understand that I needed a bank account. I needed etc., from a business side of things. And then I also had to understand the brand side of things, building a brand. How do I get brand awareness? How do I get my brand taken to the world? So ideally, I think like training and education and a supreme focus, understanding by the government, understanding by the corporate citizenry, for example, corporate clients, etc., take interest in the creative industry, because I believe it's a sustainable industry once it is understood and once it's elevated and supported, so that persons within the industry as an ecosystem can take what they do best to the world.
Jules, Commander-in-Chief. You got me confused. Tell me, when you think of income generation, how could the creative industry become an income generator in our country?
I will definitely tell you one thing. We need to understand what we have right in front of us. I would just draw back to the example of, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm now learning and exploring and understanding what is right in front of me. So I think the first thing is to understand what we have. The second thing is that how do we take what we do best to the world? There's a lot of training and education and workshops, and there needs to have an understanding, and a form of education needs to take place with the creative industry, because I come face to face with persons who have individual brands, who are startups, and they're finding difficulties to take themselves to the next level. They're finding difficulties in ways of generating income. They're finding difficulties in ways of how they can build their brand that will help them to generate income. So there's a lot of teaching and education that is necessary for creatives. I will also say that this is the realm, or this is the time for the fusion of creative and tech. There's a need for an understanding of how technology plays a very instrumental role in getting yourself out there to the world and being able to monetize what you do best. I think that is very important as well. The whole aspect of creative times technology is becoming so significant now. So an example here is that I would have been Caesar's Army, and we would have been doing events because of the pandemic unleashing itself. That caused events to stop. As a company, was I supposed to just stop and wait for when events would return? No. I use the power of what we do best. Let's just say we create experiences. And I invested in a virtual reality platform that would have somehow replicated the aspect of having a physical event into a virtual event space. So in a sense, I was able to say, I can adapt, I can pivot, but at the same point in time, I'm embracing technology to find new ways to generate income. So again, not everybody has the expertise. There's a lot of experience that I had to go through, a lot of failures, etc. But there's a lot of education that needs to be given to the creative industry, especially in the realm of business and especially in the realm of brand. How do I take my brand domestically, regionally, internationally?
Mm-hmm. What have you learned from some of your failures? Because you have said that because you pivoted, you started a new platform, you had to learn, and you also had a couple of bits of failures. Can you share some of your learnings with us?
I can definitely tell you that one of my learnings is that I had to understand exactly what was my passions, right? So take for example, a lot of people would have understood that I love events, but really and truly, if I had to be very honest with you, I love building brands. And even though I may have been led into the field of doing a number of events, what really inspired me was the storytelling behind the events, the actual names and the concepts and the themes behind the events. Each event that I've built for Caesar's Army has been an individual brand. So I can tell you for a fact that when you understand truly what is your passion, it kind of leads you to your purpose. Because eventually, after learning that, I created a brand agency that builds and manages and champions the brands of others, individuals and startups to the promised land. That is my love. So ideally, I can see myself saying, oh, I've understood my passion. It's leading me to my purpose. That's one. Two, I realized that I could not do everything on my own. There's this thing, especially with the creative industry, that we have a particular skill set, but we get so involved in everything else that is involved in building a brand or building a company that we tend not to focus on our skill set. So I will definitely tell you that a learning for me was not trying to do everything on my own. Build a team one by one and let them focus on what you may consider as your weaknesses, right? And I think one last learning was that especially when you focus on your passion, and especially when you build a team one by one, don't forget Rome was not built in a day. It takes time to build great empires, but you have to start brick by brick. The last thing is that you must be able to understand, take what you do best to the world. I was able to start doing events domestically at home. Carnival was my long-term goal. I just wanted to penetrate Carnival back in the days. That was the thing to be. And then I realized if I really love what I'm doing, I actually was able to export my events to regionally and internationally. And now the sky is the limit. So really and truly, as I would have always stated, Rome was not built in a day. Take things time by time, be resilient, be patient, and your fruits will bear.
Thank you very much, Jules. And just before we part, it's Caesar's Army, and you talk about Rome. What is the thing there? I'm hearing a theme coming out.
I felt like in school when everyone was tempted to take these subjects such as engineering or business, anything, law, become a doctor. I love English literature. And I now realize over the years that I loved literature because I love storytelling. And I also fell in love with Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. So for me, my whole life has been about building an empire, just like Rome. So the story of my life kind of just tells and plays its part through my triumphs, through my failures. But I'm seeing the vision now, the long term. I want to build an empire. I want to take our culture to the world. I'm very strategic. So all of these things play a part in understanding your passion. And as I said before, your passions will lead you to your purpose. So yes, I'm building an empire.
Thank you very much, Jules. And what we have here is a merging of classical literature, of classical history, of purpose, of passion to make a difference to our country. Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back, Demming Chronicles. And on this segment, we have Katherine Agong. And what strikes me about Katherine is she's a transportation professional, transportation specialist. But the other thing is because most of the people I've spoken to about transportation are men. So, Katherine, welcome and tell me, what got you into transportation?
Thank you for having me, Denise. Yes, that is correct. It's about 30% women, 70% men in Trinidad and Tobago, although it's a very small group of us. That's the gender split. I believe it or not, it is something that was planted in me when I was about 7 or 8 years old, because I grew up in Diego Martin. But early on in my primary school career, I went to school in Port of Spain. And we used to get in so much traffic trying to get out of Diego Martin to get into the school in Port of Spain that it caused me a lot of anxiety because I hated to be the spotlight for reaching to school late. So I used to think, oh my gosh, I wonder if there's some way or somebody could solve these traffic problems so that I could get to school on time and not be late and not stand out and not have anxiety. So just park that to the side for many, many years, of course. I went through this whole thing of wanting to be a doctor and all of that. But when I really searched myself and I looked at what I was good at, I thought maybe something along the human geography lines would be best suited for me. So I did that at the tertiary level along with geology. And then when I was searching for what I'd do next, I came across transportation planning and transportation engineering as a career. While I was doing my geography and geology degree, I had one module where we learned about the relationship between development and transport. And that is what showed me that there is actually a career to solve traffic and transport problems. So that's what I pursued. And yeah, I've been doing it for over 20 years.
And let's dig right into it. You talk about the relationship between transportation and development. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Well, we all need to use the land space that's available to us for different purposes: education, residential, business, commercial, that kind of thing. And in doing so, it builds up these needs to move from one place to another. So I need to move from home to school. I now need to move from home to work and so forth. And in order to move efficiently and safely, we have to be able to have really well thought out, designed, monitored, and managed transportation systems. So that is the relationship. We people, we don't stay in one place. We have to move to different places to fulfill our sort of economic and social needs. So that's the relationship basically. And it's best way to do that is what we grapple with every day.
Yes, Trinidad is grappling with transportation, and there's quite a lot of lack of productivity that occurs because of our transportation system. But I would like you to just reflect for a little bit on how could public transportation benefit our people? Mass transit, how could that benefit us?
On an individual basis, there's so many benefits to public transportation. The number one benefit that everybody knows about now is environment and air quality concerns. Using less cars during those peak traffic periods will help reduce the emissions of really harmful gases that could cause asthma and other illnesses. It's quite cost effective, so there's some money to be saved by using public transportation. It's faster sometimes if it's designed properly. It's faster than using your own car to move from point A to point B. Public transportation is also, provides access to health and social and economic benefits that some people cannot access if they do not have a car. So to me, public transport is the absolute minimum that we should have as a society to help, all of that. So those are just some of the benefits of public transportation.
Trinidad has bandied around this concept of a park and ride. How do you see that helping us?
It depends. It depends on how well it's designed and executed. I do a significant part of my work at the University of the West Indies. I'm doing a PhD and I do research there as well. And we did a study recently that showed that there are several factors that people use to help decide what mode of transportation they would use. And some of the factors are comfort, convenience, travel time, safety, what else? Price as well. So park and ride, it's a good thing holistically, but whether it benefits us or not in the Trinidad and Tobago context is whether it's designed with these factors in mind. Number one factors being reliability and comfort, and then safety and things follow after that. So our research has shown that in Trinidad and Tobago, these are the factors that influence how people travel. And if the park and ride is located in an appropriate location, it's priced properly, there's comfort, there's convenience and reliability, number one, I think it is something that people would definitely consider to switch from their cars to using park and ride.
Can you think of any other country in which like a park and ride has played a role in helping people switch from their private vehicles to using public transport?
Yes, a significant part of the 20 years that I've been doing this work was in the United Kingdom. And I often use park and ride to get to and from work. So in the United Kingdom, transportation is governed by an overall departmental sort of level, and then a national level rather, and then it gets broken down into sort of a local and regional level. So in certain areas where they found that there was too much congestion and they wanted to, say, reduce harmful emissions from vehicles, they sought to implement park and ride, because that is the kind of sweet spot between using your own car and using public transport, because people would drive to the park and ride site, massive parking area with toilets and shelters to shelter from the rain and extreme weather. And it's been very successful in some parts of the United Kingdom. There have been failures, and those failures related to the location of the park and ride in relation to where people live, with it not being a convenient location, which is why I said design of a park and ride is ultimately important in its success. And other failures have come about through not having adequate parking policies in the major cities. So if parking is such that it works out cheaper than taking a park and ride, a good significant number of people will continue to drive and park because it's cheaper to do that than to take the park and ride. So the pricing of the tickets and everything involved in the parking policies need to really be looked at to support success for park and ride.
I have often reflected on how we manage events in this country, large events. And I'm assuming that at some point we will get back to large events. And I've often asked myself, how is it that we do not use something like a park and ride to help people go to events and come back safely? Do you see that park and ride can work for some of the big events that Trinidad often hosts?
Yes, definitely. In fact, it's something that I've worked on for two major projects in Trinidad and Tobago. One of them was not implemented due to reasons beyond my control, but the plan is still there, and that is for park and ride relating to Carnival. One was it 2019. 2019, myself and another female transportation planner and engineer designed a park and ride system to facilitate Carnival for certain events, certain Carnival events, and for certain Carnival days, for example, Carnival Tuesday. And I also did the transport plan for Carry Festa. Parts of the plan, again, were implemented. Parts of it weren't implemented, but I've got a lot of experience in event parking and planning, and just giving a shameless plug for the other side of the work that I do, which is transportation planning and engineering consultancy. And event parking and management is a key part of that, and something I'd like to expand upon. Again, park and ride, there's a science behind it. It's not just a bus at a parking lot and people get on. There's so many other factors that go into making it successful. And like I said at the start of this interview, there's only a small number of us transportation planners and transportation engineers in the country, and only some specialize in public transport and things like park and ride. So it's up for people like myself and event planners to come together to make that more of a reality, because it's so anxiety causing to have to go to an event and wonder where you're going to park, if you're going to get a parking space and things like that. It, you know, if everyone searches themselves, they will know that that is really anxiety causing, and it's something that people like myself with my knowledge and experience can solve, you know, without a problem.
As we bring this interview to a wrap, Katherine, tell me, if you could take one action, if you were in a leadership role and you could take one action or maybe two to help Trinidad and Tobago with our transportation issues, what would you do?
Okay, if I were, say, director of a national transportation planning agency, well, the first thing I would do is to develop something like that, a national transportation planning and management agency, because there's none at the moment. And all countries that we travel to, the United States, Europe and stuff, we love to talk about the ease of traveling around those countries. But people don't know that there is a massive undertaking going on behind the scenes to ensure that you travel around these countries safely and efficiently. So that's the number one thing I would do. And if I were director of such an agency, I would invest heavily in last mile and first mile transit. And that is the part of the journey from your home to, say, the main transit line. In our case, an example would be from your home in, say, El Dorado to the priority bus route, where then you can then switch from that mode of transport to a bus or a maxi and continue on your journey. And then at the other end, say in Port of Spain, you can take another last mile transit form to take you from downtown Port of Spain to your final destination. Because I think mass transit cannot be as successful as we want it to be unless we look at first mile and last mile transit as a subsection of transport planning. And then the other thing I would do is to understand the factors that influence how people choose to travel. And they are reliability, price, comfort, convenience, safety, accessibility. Those are the things that people, you're not conscious of it every day when you're trying to decide and plan your journey for the next day. But these are the things that we consider. And comfort and reliability and convenience are very, very high. And I think, I know that they are the reasons why we have such a high, mode share for the car, which means a lot of people, at more than half of the population, use cars in main journey, 54%. When it comes to work, 74% use the car to get to and from work. So yeah, that's what I would do.
And on that note, thank you very much, Katherine. We have solutions. It's a question of how do we implement those solutions. Park and ride is a possibility, but mass transportation in our country can help towards our development. It can help towards people's comforts and improve people's lives. Demming Chronicles Season 2. Thank you very much for being with us. Like and share our programs. Reach out to us, comments. Demming Chronicles Season 2. Thank you for being, and be safe.